Hello gentlemen, I am Vitold and I just, for some reason, greeted the male part of the audience, as I actually hardly believed in the past that there would be any ladies interested in the Yamaha Tenere 700, but now I know that there are some of you ladies out there, so hello ladies as well. Now this is a video out of my series of mid-size adventure motorcycle reviews, and I've gone through all the large adventure motorcycles already, and now it's time for these ones. I've left Tenere, Aprilia, Tuareg and a Ducati DesertX for the last, as they seem to be more off-road oriented motorcycles that aren't as popular on the roads as their, let's for now call them more on-road focused brothers and sisters. And here I am just giving back the latest Tenere 700 with this new much nicer dash that is now displaying stuff that looks much more modern in 2023. A good change. However, there is one very strong reason why I myself could not have or even ride this bike. It is fairly simple but strong and an actual deal breaker for me. I managed to go through with my time on this bike, but that's it for me. It doesn't mean that something is faulty, that something is uncomfortable, or it just doesn't suit me, like let's say a narrow seat. No, but let me start from the beginning, as I actually wasn't exactly sure what to expect from a motorcycle that looks like it could ride in a Dakar rally only after having its tires replaced with off-road ones. And that is basically how it could be, in fact, I think. But only in some specific cases, if you have a very small height. I took this Tenere for some off-roading, as you guys sometimes request me to do now, and please do not ask me for that again. It was close this time. Probably because the dealer from which I rented the bike very clearly warned me to be careful. So I was, but still got caught by surprise. It was mostly bike's fault. And I'll get to that too. So this Tenere 700 is tall. It's got this narrow seat at 87.5 centimeters, and that's exactly how high I feel still okay. And I'm 1 meter 83 centimeters tall, or 6 feet tall, with fairly standard length of my legs, just very beautiful and slim ones, obviously. I feared one thing in particular, and it turned out to be absolutely fine, and that's the seat itself, which may scare you looking like the ones in the dirt bikes, but it's not as hard as you might expect. You can be actually pretty comfortable on it, actually even more comfortable than some other, or even the large adventure motorcycles like, let's say, Honda Africa Twin 1100, for example. It's not exactly soft here, but it suited me, and I do like them comfy. This one here is generally narrow, so during super long trips, you wouldn't exactly have as much support as on more, let's call them again, on-road focused, which will turn out at some point not to be exactly true. But for now, more on-road focused motorcycles in this segment, so keep that in mind. On the other hand, because it's rather high, you may feel the edges of it when extending your legs to support yourself. And this would be something I think to look out for the most, I think. Take that into account. In those circumstances, I was there feeling like I'm giving a birth when having to stop at the traffic lights after some time of riding. If the seat was any wider, it could be bad for me, I think. But overall, it's better than I expected, and overall, I think I could live with it myself. The handlebar is also narrower than I would expect it to be. Not too narrow, not too wide, but I would say in a perfect position for me overall, in a perfect setup. I just didn't like the handguard sticking out to the sides too much, I think, and making it much harder to filter traffic in the city. So using the bike seems to be really easy, as there is only a small menu with a few things to check and to set up, like switching perhaps ABS off in the rear or fully, and there are two themes of this new for 2023 display. You use this wheel on the right side of the handlebar that you can press, or you can press and hold to do certain things. It is not as clear to use, as sometimes it's enough to just press it to select something, but then in some other places, like with the teams, I'm still not sure if you need to just press and hold, or press and then press and hold to select another team, or just press and leave it, or whatever to do exactly with that. A super simple menu that turns out to be a bit tricky in the end, but you won't have to get there often, thankfully in this case. On the bike, you are sitting very upright, as the handlebar is at the height that felt super natural for me somehow, not low and forcing me to bend forward and also not too high, so that I would feel, let's say, out of control when steering. Ergonomics are really good here for the upper part of my body. Lower parts were not as happy because foot pegs are a tiny bit higher than I would prefer them to be to feel comfortable. It's not something that I would notice in the beginning, but after some riding, it crossed my mind that it would have been nice to have them lower. Brake and gear levers are pretty high in relation to them, but somehow on this bike it wasn't bothering me. The only issue that kept happening and I would be interested to adjust is the gear lever, that because of long travel a few times would not manage to fully move up when changing from the first to the second gear, and instead the bike would end up in neutral. Imagine my surprise. Then I realized that if I move further away from the handlebar on the seat and change my knee and foot angle, I could much easier move my left foot up fully and more confidently switch gears up. And it's cool about the seat that you can move on it as far back as you want because it's pretty flat. It doesn't hold you in place like, for example, in a BMW S1000XR, which I know that many of you guys don't like and complain about, and also the direct competitor Aprilia Tuareg has a similar situation, up to a point. Understandable. On Tenere 700, I was almost able to flat foot. Somehow, when riding, I wasn't able to do so, but then sitting on a bike with no motorcycle gear, no motorcycle boots, I was pretty much able to do it there. And yes, I'm thinking it's perhaps my motorcycle boots that are having lower heels than I thought. Holding the bike upright is easy as it's fairly light. At 205 kilograms with fuel, this is rather light for this kind of bike. However, moving it around is not as easy, and then you realize that it's still over 200 kilograms, so a lot of kilograms. And they're high, so a little bit of a lean, and then you are basically lifting all that when standing next to a bike and trying to move it. At some point when I was moving the bike to capture these shots for you guys, I had a vision that perhaps I am trusting the low weight too much, as at some point I was like, damn, a misstep on a stone and this thing goes down. Same when riding and stopping on top of a rut with one of my feet lower than the other one that was on top of the rut, and I was very carefully watching what was going to happen and where I'm placing my feet, you know, but things that you don't want to happen usually when you don't think about them, so nothing happened here. Let's keep in mind that it's a top-heavy machine even despite being pretty light. In comparison to the new XL750 Transalp, you've got to watch yourself here much more when moving the bike around and when trying to support yourself. But to hell with that, how does it ride? First of all, it's not a super powerful motorcycle with 689 cubic centimeters of displacement, with 74 horsepower and 68 newton-meters of torque. These numbers do not really impress very much, but the bike delivers better performance than one might actually expect looking at those numbers, and that's the better way. I thought it would be a sloppy engine combined with a jelly suspension, and this is a completely wrong assumption. Nothing is now certain in the motorcycle industry until you try and make sure yourself. So I did. Power delivery is linear and there aren't any weak or any explosive, for that matter, spots as well. It pulls steadily from the bottom, it doesn't choke and doesn't get upset if you stay with a gear that is too high and you open the throttle. It also doesn't suddenly engage that badly after closing and after then opening the throttle, for example, when riding around on a roundabout. There's a bit of that, but it's quite composed, it's under control. It's also got one super awesome thing that makes it feel totally adequate when just riding around, when playing in the city or anywhere else, as long as it's not a highway or just a high-speed road. And this engine, being a parallel twin, so an inline two-cylinder engine, it sounds freaking awesome. The muffler itself has something inside that makes it throw violent sounding explosions out of there, and it's actually so much fun just revving it at idle. I even managed to scare some cute pedestrians crossing the road late. So much fun, guys, and at the same time this does two things. Firstly, it makes you feel that the bike is more powerful and quicker, And secondly, it stimulates you, so makes you ride more aggressively as the audio encourages you to play with the bike. I really do like that. Only Honda and now also this Yamaha with the Tenere give us some fun with the stock exhaust on their bikes. Transalp and Africa Twin also sound great, but this one here has that, exploding throaty sound in the beginning too. This is all part of a reason why I said that performance seems adequate. If not for the audio experiences, for the sound, it likely wouldn't feel that way. So good job Yamaha here. Flexibility on the hand is, anyway, no matter what you do, no matter the sound isn't great, and hence the need for this bike to have, I think, shorter gears, which it does have actually, so it's all there. But then this results in a lot of clutch work and changing gears really pretty much all the time. Yeah, my left hand was getting tired because of that. There's also no cruise control here, but you can pull nice wheelies. The transmission itself is working precisely, but needs some force to go, especially from the first to the second gear through the neutral. On the other hand, the benefit is that it's easy to find neutral here, and well, there's no quick shifter. I wouldn't be surprised to learn that this is the slowest bike in the middle-sized adventure motorcycles segment, but it doesn't feel that way thanks to the way it sounds, and that I think is what matters. Staying still on the road, you may and you should be wondering how it rides with that large front wheel with a 21-inch front rim. In the rear there's an 18-inch rim, and I believe that the tires are tubed, despite Yamaha very carefully not stating that anywhere. So not the best for most of us, I think. So big wheels, fairly long travel suspension, as there is 21 centimeters of front wheel travel and 20 centimeters in the rear. This is not a crazy amount, and some other motorcycles in the category have similar capabilities, like a Transalp 750 with 20 centimeters in the front and 19 in the rear, so just 1 centimeter less accordingly. Now then, a regular KTM 890 also has 20 in the front and also 20 in the rear, so just 1 centimeter less in the front. But then there is a V-Strom 800E with 22 centimeters in the front and also in the rear, so more than this regular Tenere 700. Triumph Tiger 900 Rally also is having more, a 24 in the front and 23 centimeters in the rear. A KTM 890 Adventure in the R variant has that staggering 24 centimeters in the front and in the rear, which is a lot and a lot more than this regular Tenere, and actually so does have Aprilia Tuareg, which is considered to be the closest competitor here, and I'll get to that in, I think, soon. I'll get there soon. However, if that is not enough in a Tenere, then there are two other variants that are taller and have larger suspension travel with 23 centimeters in the front and 22 in the rear. They're called World Rally and World Raid. Still, you might expect that this bike would have specification of a something that can fly through a desert with super long travel suspension, but well, not really in the standard version. All right, so there are two big things to say about how Tenere 700 handles. One is good, one is bad. The good one is that it's super easy to lean and turn. It does it effortlessly. It remains fully neutral. You may open the throttle wide in a turn or start braking while in a curve, and the bike stays exactly on its course. But it's that ease of changing directions and how light Tenere feels when doing so that is totally awesome. I really did not expect that. Now, the bad thing is that this ease ends around 80 to 100 kilometers per hour, where that large front wheel perhaps comes into play in general geometry, and then it takes time and effort to change directions. You won't do it as quickly, but this is how these taller bikes, but also not only taller bikes, this is how bikes sometimes are. I'm glad that Tenere still stays neutral, and it just takes a little bit more time and more pulling and pushing of the handlebar to make a turn. At those lower speeds, it's really good though, and this is a serious compliment from me here. It especially counts since this bike isn't perhaps exactly intended for high speeds, so it doesn't really matter that much, I guess. There's even a sticker warning you about reaching 170 kilometers per hour. And then the wind protection isn't really there with that screen that works mostly as a shield for the dash, and even though it doesn't generate any turbulences at any speeds, and it does help the stream of wind to be pretty nice and smooth and calm, it doesn't protect your helmet a lot. So high speeds, or let's call them higher speeds at over 100 kilometers per hour, are not a welcome challenge for this bike. Filtering traffic is quite good because you sit high, you can see far with that dominating position on the bike. I do like that. It is not as aggressive as on a KTM 1290 Super Adventure R, the big one, which I like even more. I love that position on that bike, but it's on the way to something similar, this Tenere. The only downside at crawling speeds is, first of all, those white handguards sticking out, and then that this handlebar isn't that super light to move, which puts you a bit out of balance, and of course you feel that the most during low speed maneuvers. If not for this, it would be fantastic. Now it's only good for filtering or slow speed riding. But yeah, that's all fine here in the handling area. I consider it to be nice, easy, and cooperating. What is screwed up for me in terms of riding on the road is suspension. Sorry, I am aware that I am now offending everyone who owns a Tenere 700 and has my mom is the best syndrome, but this bike is bloody stiff no matter what you do. It is stiffer than a Transalp, which I already mentioned. That's too stiff in that review, too stiff and too bouncy actually. Now this thing here made me avoid potholes on tarmac, which is totally not what I would want from this sort of bike. I really thought that it would fly over bumps and potholes, but instead it was trying to break my back. I cannot say that it was that far from succeeding in terms of breaking my back. I really do not like this suspension, and the only option is playing with its settings and moving all the way to the softest, but it still is hard. That's just the way it is. Nah, the experience is very shaky, and let me say it, suspension-wise, this is the least comfortable motorcycle in the mid-size segment so far. So whether it's a single bump here or an overall uneven stretch of road, like gravel road for example, I would suffer due to how hard the suspension is. In the corners it gets a bit floaty when riding over some changes in elevation or some uneven paths when the road is not exactly perfectly flat. Now on the positive side, heat management is very good and fans work when needed, doing their job. Vibration is totally fine for me, and despite keeping the bike in the higher RPM, quite a lot to access most of its power and torque and to play with that sound. There was no annoying vibration. It is a pretty civilized experience here in terms of engine and everything that's related. And same about the brakes that are strong both in the front and in the rear. And surprisingly, the rear one works very, very well. It may occasionally even start locking the rear wheel and generating some noise, some tire squeaking noise this way. So it's pretty liberal, but it does the job. Both brakes are easy to dose and strong. Only if you brake hard with the front one, the bike dives significantly with its front suspension. Otherwise, the front suspension is hard enough that the bike stays flatter than expected. Front and rear suspension is manually adjustable. I really love that 4 LED front light. It is not a cornering light, but it does look great, and firing up all 4 light sources makes the car drivers see you from a mile away, and I could see that they notice me. Very, very nice. The dashboard allows you to see digital imitation of an analog ref counter, but that needle, well, it works like in a Nintendo Game Boy from the 90s or early 2000s, whenever that was introduced. So it is so choppy and with a delay. Well, anyway, I appreciate that Yamaha tried. Maybe next time they will do better. Mirrors are not as good as I would like them to be, as they are cut in the lower outside corners and you cannot see much of what's going on the sides behind you. Fuel tank in this regular Tenere 700 holds 16 liters, while in World Rally and World Raid it's 23 liters. And there are 2 separate fuel caps in those bikes that you need to fill the tank through separately. Weird. Don't get surprised when you open the fuel cap in the regular Tenere, in this one, and it stays in your hand. Yep, It's like in a kettle that has a removable lid instead of a regular cap that just jumps back. Not comfortable, as you've got to carry it wet with petrol over the bike, put it somewhere, likely you will leave the bike's key inside and you will then keep looking for it at some point, or you'll eventually drop it into the dirt and then all that will land in the bike's fuel tank, or you'll have to find a good way to wash it somehow and dry it before. Bad idea, I think, and this is irritating to me. Also, once you install it back, you might slightly twist it and leave it that way, as there's nothing that's locking the position of it. Also frustrating if you like things straight and symmetrical. Then we've got a standard chain in the rear, and the windshield also is not adjustable in this bike, and this is basically it. And that's why I personally wouldn't be able to buy this bike. The only time in my life that I had a crash on a motorcycle was because my rear tire gave up on a slippery, which I didn't know was that slippery surface, when exiting a corner, and despite me initially countering it, then it suddenly came across a more grippy part and sent me and the bike flying, which was not the most pleasant experience in my life. It started hurting 20 to 30 minutes later, but nothing would have happened if the bike that I was on had traction control. And Yamaha Tenere 700, ladies and gentlemen, doesn't have traction control. And look, there are things that just are out of our control, especially if we are not super crazy professional riders that ride on a perfectly prepared and cleaned track. It's just not happening. We're riding on public streets, on public roads, where there's a lot of crap, a tractor or an old truck drops some oil, a BMW GS rider has a drive shaft failure and leaves a puddle of oil somewhere, and we ride over it. With no ABS, we've got no chance, especially that it catches us off guard. With no traction control, we also sometimes have no chance. And I personally am not going, or I wouldn't be going to take that risk. And that's why I am done with the Tenere 700, and only because of the lack of the safety systems, of this particular safety system, I cannot recommend anyone riding it. There's also no tire pressure monitor, there's no keyless access, no electronically adjustable suspension. That's tech bullcrap, you might say. There are no riding modes, who cares? I don't even give crap about them actually. But on the other hand, it's equipped with tires that are sort of 50-50 street and off-road tires, and they aren't the best on the tarmac. So some safety support, I think, would be highly appreciated. Also because of the lack of the control over the rear wheel, when you release the clutch quickly, when dropping the gears when riding, the rear wheel sometimes locks up and the rubber squeaks as if you were braking with no ABS. Well, it's fine until it's fine, and then it's not. I wish Yamaha had a version that would be more civilized in terms of everyday riding safety. I also took the bike to a gravel road that then turned into a sandy path, and well, I did ride through it. It was shaky, I didn't like it. I did somehow stand on the pegs, but this is not exactly what I would be doing with an adventure motorcycle like this, simply because with a lot of weight high up, you're going to go down at some point, and then it's pricey to fix those still fairly expensive motorcycles. Tenere 700 is by no means cheap. It's definitely not a cheap bike, being actually around 10% more than the new Transalp 750. On the sandy path, at some point, switching from the first to the second gear, again, the neutral got in the way. And so I took a peek. I looked down at the dash, noticing that, yeah, shit, it is in neutral somehow. And by doing so, I rode off the course, coming against a sandy wall, sort of a wall on the track, which is not what you want with sand. And then supporting myself on a tall bike when I'm already at my limits in terms of height is an experience that I do not necessarily enjoy. So yeah, that's transmission again. That's why I said before that it was not exactly my fault that I was close to it. Another thing is that standing on the pegs, you've got to bend a lot. If you cannot stand on the pegs, and being my height, which is pretty average, I'm not the shortest, but I'm also not the tallest guy. And then having the pegs so high and the handlebars so low that after a few minutes of riding, my thighs are burning, it's just not the way it could be. And there is a solution to that, which is buying another bike. And there is one that actually does it well. So to me, none of those motorcycles is a pure off-road machine, and I wouldn't ride any of them out there for fun. Just so you know where I stand, despite deciding to test ride a Tenere 700, which is claimed to be, again, that super off-road machine. I also drive an SUV car that I took for some sandy and steep off-roading once in its life and in my life. It's even got a rear locker. Both SUVs and adventure motorcycles are a certain style, and they also bring to the table some other advantages that are unique to them and only come with adventure motorcycles and SUV cars, like being taller, you're sitting high, having great visibility, there's usually a more comfortable posture behind the handlebar and also behind the steering wheel of a car. Suspension has longer travel, and adventure motorcycles have it usually more comfortable than conventional motorcycles. Yeah, that's the general truth here. All those things are unique to them, and that's why most of us enjoy them so much, not because we take them off-road. And I would still see it totally fine to ride Tenere 700 just like any other non-off-road focused motorcycle. As a rider who doesn't intend to ride off the road, if I had to, I think I would prefer to take a V-Strom 800 DE, which doesn't shake and jump as much, is lower and easier to control, and if you need to support yourself, because the seat height is at 85.5 centimeters, so 2 centimeters lower. There's more suspension travel, and only 2 centimeters less of ground clearance at 22 instead of 24 centimeters in Tenere 700. This is where this review leaves us, basically. If I were to score this bike, forgetting about the lack of traction control, because keeping in mind, it doesn't make sense to score it, that I wouldn't even consider it at all, I would give it a 6 out of 10 on Vitol's recommendation board. It handles well, it is acceptably comfortable to sit on, it sounds and perhaps looks pretty cool, but then suspension is not comfortable, and there's not much you can do about that. There is a modern tech that is missing, which I understand that 2% of riders will claim that they don't want it, as that means that the bike may be unreliable. I do not fully support this claim myself. There's also no real wind protection, and that limits usability as well. Also, the performance isn't that great. And I hope that you found this review useful and you appreciate my honesty. And if you do, then do subscribe for the next reviews and head-to-head comparisons, and check those beautiful office chairs, electric office chairs, more technologically advanced likely than a Tenere, but by the way, but also perhaps more reliable, at least so far, after years of using. All right, see you guys.